Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ for the 22nd Sunday of Ordinary Time from the Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the place of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man," and then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The good news of the Lord. This gospel passage almost sounds like a bit of advice on etiquette that you might get from Miss Manners, or perhaps Dale Carnegie on how to win friends and influence people. If you want to look good, put on the mask of humility. But it is clear that Jesus is not teaching mere courtly etiquette for the next time you're invited to a wedding. Rather, he is teaching us about a very important but not very popular virtue: humility. This virtue of humility flies in the face of the model of maturity presented in our society. In countless ways, we are told that to be adult and mature is to be self-sufficient, self-assertive, independent, in charge of our own lives, able to solve the problems and answer the questions. In short, the rugged individual. There's almost no place for qualities such as humility in such a model, unless, of course, your ambition is to be a wimp, to which we are likely to respond, "No, thank you." Perhaps that is due to our inadequate, even mistaken understanding of what humility is. Look at where the word humility comes from, the Latin word humus, and that is the clue that opens up its meaning. Humus is gold to every farmer, gardener, anyone who has ever put a seed in the ground. It is composed of decayed plant and animal matter. It is the most organic and richest part of the soil. When it is tilled and broken open to receive seed and rainfall and sunlight, the dark humus yields the most bountiful harvests and the most beautiful of flowers. And the word humus is also the root word of two virtues: humor, especially toward oneself, not taking myself too seriously. As one of the hidden Beatitudes puts it, "Blessed are those who can laugh at themselves, for they shall never cease to be amused." And the second virtue is humility. Like the rich, broken soil of humus, humility is the capacity to be open to receive the seeds of experience, both the painful and the enriching, in order to grow in wisdom and understanding. As the spring soil must be broken of its winter hardness, so that it may be enriched by rain and nutrients. Humility is the grace to let ourselves be broken, broken of our pride, our ego, our self-absorption, in order to realize a harvest far greater than ourselves, a harvest that is possible only through generous openness, selfless giving, and enlightened gratitude. Humility is the grace to plant in hope, persevere through droughts and storms, and reap in joy. Humility is the rich soil that supports the growth of many Christian virtues. But humility, the earthy virtue, has nothing to do with thinking that I am dirt, or that in order to be a good Christian, I have to let others walk all over me. Rather, humility is all about honesty. It has to do with getting my feet on the ground, standing up straight, and looking myself honestly in the eye. Humility is knowing who I really am, my weaknesses, but also my strengths, without pretense or game playing, which also helps me, at least occasionally, to laugh at myself. Humility and humor support one another, and both are strengthened if there is someone else in my life who can look me in the eye and remind me of my need for both humility and humor. Like perhaps a spouse? Such a soul friend is a great blessing. One part of this self-awareness is knowing and accepting my limits, because they mark off my uniqueness much as a friend marks off a pasture. A young colt will sometimes run around a pasture without hardly noticing it, because the colt is convinced that the grass really is greener on the other side of the fence and is trying to figure out how to get there. A more mature horse is inclined to be content with and even enjoy the pasture that is its own. It takes most of us many years and a good deal of maturing before we are able to know our uniqueness, our limits, and be content with that. But in that maturing, we become a bit more humble. Horses get there before we do. Maybe there is some virtue in being an old gray mare. Knowing and accepting our limits is no easy matter, especially in a society that calls us to be successful, unique, secure, perfect, and right. And we bring all of those calls into the spiritual realm, believing that will protect us from facing our dependence upon God, or keep us from experiencing life as a mystery we can neither fathom nor control. Maybe that is why one of the most essential challenges we face is truly to accept our limits. When we do this, the opportunity for personal growth and development is almost limitless. As the poet E. E. Cummings said, "To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight, and never stop fighting." Another ingredient in this self-knowledge is acknowledging my abilities and talents. Because these are God's gifts to me, I cannot take any credit for them, but I should take increasing responsibility for them by searching for the ways in which God wants me to use my gifts and talents in building up the reign of God. By recognizing that my talents and gifts are not for me, but are meant to be given away, I am growing in Christian maturity. And it is good to remember the wisdom of one of the early desert fathers, Abba Silvanus, who warned, "Woe to you whose reputation is greater than your talents." Humility, knowing honestly who I am, obviously includes knowing that I live in relation to God, that I am God's son or God's daughter, that I am dependent upon God. This foundational ingredient of humility frees me from always attempting to be in control or thinking that I can or should be in control. Just one more element of cultural maturity. Because I trust that God is really the one in control, thinking that I must always be in control and trying to live that way will not only destroy my relationship with God, it will also destroy my relationships with my spouse, my family, friends, others. Because trying to stay in control means trying to manipulate and control them as well, which is a great way to undermine relationships. Being humble allows me to accept not being in control. It also allows me to admit that I am not self-sufficient, that I need others, an admission which is a critical ingredient in marriage, family life, friendship, and spirituality. Perhaps it is becoming clear that humility is a move away from the isolation of self-sufficiency and toward the intimacy of interdependence. It is also a movement away from violence. Humility chooses not to take the road of violence, whether of word, deed, or attitude, because it is based on trusting God rather than trying to be self-sufficient. We resort to violence when we run out of patience. That's presuming there was any patience there to begin with, of course. While humility, with its reminder that God is in control, chooses patience over violence. We resort to violence when we feel threatened and weak. It is a rare person who can be calm and gentle under attack. But humility, recognizing that strength comes from God rather than from myself, chooses endurance over violence. If someone insults me, but I am honest enough, which is to say, humble enough to know my strengths and weaknesses, I'm less likely to be threatened by the insult. I can accept whatever truth there is in it and let the rest pass. Humility, then, is not weakness, but strength. Humble people are strong enough not to need to be defensive, or strike back, or demand respect, or prove their worth. They know that their real worth is based on being God's sons and daughters, and so they are free of pretense, illusion, and game playing. Perhaps you can begin to see how radically countercultural Jesus' message is. Humility is not inaction, but it is knowing when and how to act. It does not say, never get angry. Indeed, anger is an appropriate response to injustice, and if we never got angry enough to challenge injustice and change the things that we can change, then God's reign, characterized by justice, peace, and mercy, would not be built. But humility helps us not to get stuck in our anger or become victims of it through pride and arrogance. How? Because, once again, humility is of the earth. And so it helps us to know where we really stand. It helps us to take a stand when it is truly necessary to do so. Then it helps us to accept the results, the reality of life, and rather than be controlled or overwhelmed by them, to make them creative for others and ourselves. Humility, then, is the road to being more relaxed and less afraid. And fear is one of the greatest obstacles in the spiritual life, something we will take up further on another day. However, we have often called fear by other names: prudence, loyalty, obedience, patriotism, when it is really nothing but fear. In order to put some flesh and blood on this virtue of humility, look to Mary. This young woman was strong enough to say yes to something, becoming the mother of Jesus, the mother of God, that would turn her life totally upside down. You've probably seen paintings of the Annunciation, as we call that moment. Oftentimes they depict Mary reading a book, presumably a prayer book, and an angel arriving to make the great announcement. Of course, I rather doubt that it happened that way. Mary probably didn't know how to read. Almost nobody did in her time. And they certainly didn't have books then. I like to imagine Mary being, oh, let's say, in the kitchen, preparing a meal, or cleaning up some dishes. Imagine yourself in a situation like that, in your own kitchen, preparing a dinner or doing the dishes, and then all of a sudden there's an angel there. You'd be afraid too. Out the window went any hopes that Mary might have had for a nice, quiet life with Joseph in Nazareth. Oh, she'd belonged to the Altar Society, of course. Joseph had belonged to the Knights of Columbus, or perhaps the Rotary Club. She was subjected to the humiliation of being married, not being married, but being pregnant, which in those days could have gotten her stoned to death. She was forced to give birth in a stable before fleeing to Egypt, history's first undocumented immigrants. She raised a son whom at times she did not understand. This, at least, sounds like the plight of many parents. And finally, she watched him die for what he believed in. That is a model not of weakness, but of both humility and great strength, and obviously something she passed on to her son, Jesus. Once again, the paradox, a man of deep strength, yet great gentleness, sure of himself, while remaining open to his Father and to those around him. Humility includes three qualities that are essential for Christ's disciples. 1. To be ignorant. You don't know it all. 2. To be weak. You can't do it all. And 3. To be teachable. You haven't learned it all. So as we grow in humility, we become more accepting of our limitations, not as obstacles or barriers to be overcome, but as necessary and graced limits that give us definition and humility, the identity of the children of God, who are even more totally and confidently dependent upon our Abba. This means we can acknowledge when we feel weak or weary and not be ashamed. And the more this virtue of humility becomes our own, the more we radiate the deep inner joy and relaxed presence, which are also gifts of the Lord. Gentleness is ours too, because by our lives we are pointing to values beyond those of efficiency and productivity that dominate our society, and the harshness, if not violence, that so often accompanies the pursuit of those values. And in the process, we become a blessing to those around us, to ourselves. Maybe being the last, rather than the first, is not such a bad idea after all. Thanks for listening. Feel free to share this reflection with others if you choose. And remember that you can always subscribe to this weekly gospel reflection by going to www.justanother.disciple.com. Once again, www.justanother.disciple.com. Thanks again.